Welcome to another edition of the Corner Booth Podcast here from the Snowdon Deli. I'm Aaron Rand from CJD, along with Bill Brownstein of the Montreal Gazette, and our two guests today. First, John Parisella, longtime Montreal political advisor, strategist, and former, for those who don't remember, chief of staff to several Quebec premiers, including Robert Bourassa, Jean Charest. Thank you for being here.
And time spent in New York City and Washington.
Exactly. I wasn't the chief of staff to Charest. I was a special advisor, but I was to Daniel Johnson, the son, chief of staff, along with Bourassa.
Thank you for the clarification.
Okay.
And Julian Karaguesian, who is a Montreal-based economist, lecturer at McGill University, been involved in senior positions with the Canadian government, specifically with relation to international economics. Thank you both for being here today.
Pleasure.
Look, we were just talking before we got going, and I said it's odd to deal in a situation now where we as a country don't really know what we're in store for from our biggest trading partner, right? We know that the tariffs that were put in place, which have now been ruled, the emergency tariffs, illegal, but yet the Canadian sectors that are the hardest hit are really not affected by this ruling. So aluminum, steel, auto. I would guess, John, first of all, because this is becoming an issue in Quebec politics, which is interesting, right? We talk about Canada, but just this week, we actually heard Paul St-Pierre Plamondon of the PQ suggest that, you know what, he was now going to consider holding consultations, didn't use the word referendum, based on the fact that we don't really know what we're in store for as long as Donald Trump is president. What did you think of that?
Well, obviously, there's two ways of looking at it. From a Quebec political point of view, it's clear that most of the polls indicate people don't want a referendum, and as a result, is he backing off? Is he trying to give himself more position? Does he want to do what Mr. Levesque did, the referendum in the last year of his mandate, or because for a while we thought he was going to do it in the first year of his mandate, like Parisella did. So I think he's trying to gain, in some ways, he's trying to gain a little bit of leverage on the whole question of Canada-U.S., it's clear that I've been involved actively in the center of three referenda in Quebec, 1980, Charlottetown, and the 1995 referendum. That doesn't make me any younger, Julian, but I would say that of all the three, the context, when you look at the context pre-referendum, if there is a referendum, it's clear that the American president has got much more of an impact on politics in Quebec and in Canada than any other president.
Oh, absolutely.
So in that sense, I wasn't surprised that he made the comment, but I don't think it's something that is going to change very much the political dynamic in Quebec. But it's clear that Mr. Trump is an important factor in what's happening in Canada and in the relationship between Canada and the United States.
So him and Milliard could head the no team.
I would just say to Julian, so you deal in economics, and the big question here is, what are we in store for? And given the lack of details that we have, this is all sort of very vague right now.
Yeah.
There's a 10% global tariff. We're not sure which ones we're going to get. How do you deal with that as a government? And what do you suppose could happen?
I mean, I think there's something intentional on the part of the Trump administration. They want to create uncertainty. They want to get all of their allies, their trading partners, wrong-footed. And then there's another part that they may not even know themselves exactly what they're doing. They don't have a clear strategy. And then there's another part, which is that I think this uncertainty with respect to the United States, with respect to our trade, I think it's going to continue. And I think it's going to continue because globally, the United States, they're no longer the hegemon. There's other hegemons out there. And they're 4.5% of the world's population. And they do 40% of the world's military spending. And they do not have the tax base right now to pay for that. And so Trump has used tariffs to both pay for this vast military infrastructure and to realign trade towards America's benefit. And the Supreme Court itself of the United States has said you cannot use tariffs to raise revenue. But I do think they're going to continue to try to do that because raising taxes in the United States to pay for their vast spending, they just can't do it politically. So I think we're in store for uncertainty beyond Trump.
He just said that there will be no more income tax in the States because of tariffs. What is this guy missing in not understanding that the tariffs don't help anybody because it's the consumers in the States who are paying for all of this? And that's always lost. It's somehow in the art. It's baffling that they don't. He has no understanding. They don't have any understanding.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, well, I'll leave you to give the more authoritative response with respect to the economics of it. But it's clear that Trump has often said that his favorite word in the vocabulary is the word tariff, and to a large extent, a lot of people don't really. Analyze what he says on those things, and they just sort of see like he's responding to the existing dynamic in politics. And of course, Mr. Biden was on a decline in his recent months in office, and so people didn't really analyze whether a tariff is a tax that the consumer, will have to ultimately pay. But I think people are starting to respond to the way he's governing. We're looking at a satisfaction approval rating of under 40% right
36
now.
or
And when you look at it by category, whether it's the management of the immigration file, illegal immigration, or you're looking at economics, you're looking at foreign policy, he's in negative numbers. So I think my sense is that what we have to do. I like what Julian said earlier. We have to be calm. I think we have to, if anything, we have to be that. And I tell everybody in different forums that we lived before Trump, we'll live after Trump. But the key thing right now is that Trump is always trying to distract the daily news item, and like it or not, I was listening to some American channels this morning. The Epstein file is not disappearing.
No,
Even if
it's getting stronger, actually.
Even if the Clintons are testifying. Yeah. So that's what we're dealing with right now. We're dealing with a guy who's changed the geoeconomics and the geopolitics that we have been accustomed to for so many years under different administrations, whether they're Republican or Democrat. This guy doesn't even say good things about previous Republican presidents. So that's what we're dealing with right now.
It's the blame Biden, blame Canada game.
Yeah.
Why do they take such joy in trying to bash Lutnick, this guy who's been implicated in the Epstein files as well in his one capacity or another? Why is it that they're so intent on creating ill will between the two countries? I mean, the joy that he took in the U.S. beating Canada.
Well, what's that line Trump uses all the time? Canada's been taking advantage of us for so long. That's the basis.
If you look at I'm not going to make a big comparison between the United States and the Soviet Union, but we saw the Soviet Union kind of melt down over the 1980s. And as they were in decline, and again, I don't think the United States is going to have the same fate, but as the Soviet Union was going from one of the two superpowers to its current status, as they were in decline, they didn't pick on their adversaries. They picked on their allies.
Right.
They picked on Poland.
Right.
They picked on Czechoslovakia, and because they were easy targets. And it's strange because as the United States loses its grip on the whole world and is concentrating on the Americas, that's in their national security strategy from November. And so I think part of it's intentional. They're signaling to their neighbors in the Americas that, well, you're in our sight, you're in our crosshairs now. And so I think they think we're an easy target, but also they think that this is their new playground. They've basically told the world with their new strategy, we're going to be focused less on Asia, we're going to be focused less on Europe, but the Americas is ours. And maybe they're sending signals.
That's a little ominous.
And he's always in a mode of negotiation. I think we have to make the distinction between the walk and the talk. He came into office in 2016 saying that he was going to opt out of NAFTA. He ultimately signed a deal with Trudeau and Obrador of Mexico, which a lot of the experts, and you're much more of an expert than I am on economics, Julian, said that basically Canada didn't lose out that much in terms of the CUSMA deal versus the NAFTA deal that we had. So he actually negotiated it. So then he comes in, he starts talking about Governor Trudeau, and he starts talking about the 51st state. If anything, he's done good things for Canada because we've never mobilized as we have. He gave a career break to Mr. Carney, who was basically a bureaucrat at bank. A governor of two different banks, which is important, but it's not a political attraction as such. So he gave him a forum, and now Mr. Carney is getting more publicity and more coverage with the Davos speech than he would have had not
From a world leader.
yeah. So I think what's happening right now is that there's a lot of talk, but there's a lot of different discussions going on. And you were associated with the Canadian Embassy. I was associated with the Quebec delegation. We talked to politicians. We talked to business people. We talked to influencers who talked to members of Congress, who talked to bureaucrats. And there's a discourse between what's in the headlines versus what's actually happening. So I would look more to the meeting between Jameson Greer, who's the negotiator for the United States, and Dominique LeBlanc, which is who's the, I would say, the top point man in Canada right now. In the meeting they're supposed to have sometime in the next few days. That'll be more important, but there will be threats, and he'll threaten to get out. But bottom line, there are midterms going on in the United States, and midterms are usually on local issues, and it's usually a referendum on the governance of the president's presidential administration. And right now, Trump is in trouble, no doubt about it.
And if Congress takes control, he's pretty much done he's a lame duck on a lot of levels, because he bypassed Congress altogether.
Is he necessarily a lame duck, even if that was to come to pass?
Well, because he can't bypass it. Because the Republicans control Congress now, so he does whatever he wants, and they don't get in his way. I don't think that would happen if Democrats took control.
My sense, Democrats got a shot at the House of Representatives. I'm not sure about the Senate.
But even still,
only 1/3 of the Senate is elected or is in the election, the midterms. But all of the Congress is, and yes, it would prevent him. He would become a lame duck, but he was going to become essentially a lame duck anyway, because he's in the second term. There will not be an amendment to the Constitution, and I don't believe in the coup d'état happening where democracy is eliminated.
He's talked about it often enough.
Yeah, but he's backed off as well, and now he's talking more about who could be a successor, and he's not where he was, and that was hurting him as well, because on the Democratic file, it's clear that American people. This is the 250th anniversary of the United States. They do believe in the Constitution, and they do believe in. And we just saw what happened last week with the Supreme Court's ruling on the tariffs.
I want to ask a question. I've never fully understood this from an economy point of view. The whole idea, if I go back to tariffs, was right. Donald Trump decided it's time for America to make things again, right? So that changed from let's send everything to China and have everything built there because they can do it so much cheaper, which seemed to be the right way to go at the time. Now you have someone in the office who wants to go back to the way things were, basically, 75 years ago. Yeah. And the tariffs were supposed to be proof that could work, right? And I read the other day that with the Supreme Court ruling and we don't know if these tariffs that were charged, which are now illegal, have to be refunded or not because they weren't legal. Yeah. Apple alone, just Apple the company, said if that was the case, they're owed about $2 billion in tariffs. So think about all the companies in America that have had to foot the bill for this. Does that policy even make sense? And I understand what it did was when the policy was first implemented, a lot of American jobs were lost because all those manufacturing jobs went somewhere else because they could be done for less. Yeah. But America can't compete on hourly wages. It can't compete on production. So how does this make sense?
The tariffs? It doesn't make sense. It would take very large-scale subsidies. It would take a massive industrial policy to re-industrialize America, to bring manufacturing back. And it would be very costly. The United States could afford it if they were talking about subsidies instead of tariffs. But it's not clear that they have even the population to do that. The population, unfortunately, it's not a very healthy population. To have a manufacturing population like China, you need fit people, and it's not even clear that they have millions of people lying around ready to go into 10-hour shifts in factories to build things. But in another sense, I mean, if you look at what other countries did during globalization, Germany, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, none of these countries sold their factories to China. They traded goods. It was the UK the United States, and to a lesser degree Canada, the people who run those countries at the time, but especially the United States and the UK, who sold their factories to China. China was asking to do business, but they weren't asking for our factories. But our CEOs at the time and our political leaders from Reagan to Bush 1 to Clinton to Bush 2, they traded away their factories, and so did Tony Blair. And the Democrats and the Labor in the United Kingdom, they did so while they were talking the talk of "I feel your pain" liberalism. But of course, while they said that they felt people's pain, they were trading so-called blue-collar jobs away on a massive scale. And so we did this to ourselves, and we can get some of that back, but I don't think tariffs are the right way to go. I think we should sit down with China and India and talk about production sharing. There's many ways to do this.
The Corner Booth podcast is brought to you in part by the Snowdon Delicatessen, where we are. 75 years in business, the hub of Montreal's greatest smoked meat, plus carnotzel, potato latkes, and the famous Snowdon Deli party sandwiches. That's the Snowdon Delicatessen. You know, that's part of the political problem now, though, right? So you have the Prime Minister, India, this week, trying to sign a deal. And yet you have people on the other side saying, wait a sec, how are we doing business with a country that was involved in killing, Canadians on Canadian soil? The situation with China, do we really want to do business with Beijing? That's a tough line to have to balance, isn't it, John?
Well, and we saw the opposition leader Polyev basically making the distinction. He said,
Right.
Yeah.
He basically made a speech that took up about 85% of what Carney was saying in Davos, but the last 15% he basically mentioned what you just mentioned in your question. It's a difficult situation. One thing for sure. The United States will remain our number one partner. In 10 or 15 years, if we're still healthy enough to be on the corner booth, we'll be saying that the number one partner remains the United States. But what is happening, though, is that it's forcing us to look elsewhere, to look at different supply chains, to look at different modes, so that we can have different economic partners. And yes, there are political issues. There was an issue, obviously, involving India, and there's always talk about about China involving itself, in an illegal way in our politics. We'll have to deal with that, like it or not. But the important thing right now is that we need to keep the dialogue going between Canada and the United States, no matter what Mr. Trump says tomorrow morning or says this afternoon. And we have to be in a win-win type of situation. And bottom line is that it's worked out. It's worked out, the Canada-U.S. relationship and Mexico that was added in the 1990s. So we've had about 40 years of a trade agreement. And I think there will be a trade agreement. I'm one of those who believes in that.
Okay.
But will there be some tariffs? Will there be some bilateral deals? I would say yes. Will the deal be signed before the midterms? I wouldn't go maybe that far, but I think we will definitely be in the direction of an agreement. And it's to Trump's. He's got some seats that are going to be definitely touched by a breakup with Canada, and so my sense is that there will be eventually a dialogue, and the political, obviously what India and China will never be, never have the relationship that we have with the United States, but that's okay. That's part of the game.
Okay.
Julian, are we better off having this Harrison fellow to be our point man rather than Lutnick? I mean, he seemed very, very negative towards Canada. Are you familiar with the new U.S. trade rep there?
Not so much, but a little bit. I don't think we're better off, but I don't know if it matters who the particular trade representative is. I think that there's going to be tariffs. I think that this administration and previous administrations of the U.S., increasingly they feel that they cannot compete in this world. They do half of their discretionary federal spending on military at the expense of their education and their healthcare systems. And so they feel the only way they can compete is with significant tariffs and also threats of actually taking things, territory, resources. So I think that we're going to have a very tough time. there's going to be a tariff. They're signaling that. They've told us that they're indifferent to having a free trade agreement. And I actually believe that. I don't think it's just, they're ready to walk away. I don't think they're going to sign a 16-year renewal of CUSMA. They're going to say, we'll continue, but we're going to review this anytime we want. So every year. I think they're going to try and extract the maximum concessions possible, and that means privileged access to our critical minerals, to our oil, to our natural gas, to our precious metals, to our water, and they want to open up our dairy markets. Dairy management, and we have to be prepared to walk away from a bad deal. And we have to remember, if we do that, that we were a rich country before we had total free trade with the United States. In 1980, before we had total free trade, Canada was one of the richest countries in the world. In fact, we've become less rich relative to the United States since we've had free trade with them. That's a fact. Our productivity as an economy has actually declined since we've had free trade with the United States. Perhaps it's better to spread our eggs in as many baskets as possible. I agree with John. The United States is always going to be our largest partner. But for our own resilience and prosperity and sovereignty, I say trade with as many countries as possible. And if we want to talk foreign interference or different culture or values, if we want to, there's about 50 countries I could add to that list. So maybe we wouldn't be trading with anybody if we put up that kind of filter.
Well, it's very interesting because the whole raison d'etre for Trump for the tariffs was bringing production back to the States, which doesn't seem to have worked whatsoever.
No.
And, all these things he was talking about, bringing plants here, they're still requiring...
Well, what's interesting about that is the fact that companies at the beginning wanting to, show favor,
Right.
would come up and say, well, we're going to build a plant here, $6 billion, we're going
Right.
to build without necessarily actually building, but just to say,
Yeah.
by the way, we understand what you want to do, so we're going to commit to building it. Several of them are either not going to get built, those have changed, and now based on the Supreme Court ruling, maybe they don't need to anymore.
Yeah.
So that's all new.
And I like what Julian said about where we were before free trade and all the assets we have. We're not in the ropes. We're in the ring, but we have to use our assets in a way that it'll be more positive. And I think when I see the Prime Minister travel around the world, I don't see that as tourism. I see that as economic and commercial development. And I think it's very positive that he's doing it, to the point that the opposition leader has seen that there's value to that. And so I think there's a consensus. If anything, Trump's done is he's made us feel more attached to Canada, and he's made us realize that we have to find solutions, and we're not without our assets. And critical minerals is not something to underestimate
Right.
in our strength.
Maybe the question I have is, to your point, was Canada complacent in the past with respect to trade? We go into India, largest economy in the world, largest population rather in the world, China second largest. Yet in the past, we've never really gone out of our way. When I say complacent, relying too much on the U.S. and not looking at potential trade deals elsewhere.
We had no reason to look otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, and it was complacency. It was the path of markets and people. We all take the path of least resistance, and they're right here, and they've been the largest economy in the world since World War II. And we could have had a more strategic. We could have been more strategic. Previous governments in Canada, and thinking, maybe we should for our
Just in
resilience.
case, what if?
Yeah,
Right?
and I don't think anybody would have imagined the extent to which the United States would run amok like this. But such dependence is in a business organization, or if you're running a country, such dependence as we have on the United States is dangerous, and we're seeing it now.
If I could just sort of put this in a sort of provincial light, Quebec, a lot of the tariffs affect Quebec directly, big aluminum industry here, right? You mentioned if the U.S. goes after dairy, which is another big part of Quebec's economy, whoever becomes the premier, what's the position they have to take with respect to the U.S.?
Well, first of all, I think Canada as a whole has done relatively well in developing a common position. I think the Council of the Federation has forced premiers to talk to each other.
Right.
And I think whoever is going to be Prime Minister, we have one now, and if there's a change or whatever, I think they realize that we can't go without having provincial input. So I think that's an important factor. Quebec, by the way, has got 10 offices on the ground in the United States. So they see the importance, but they also have something like 24 other offices around the world. And I think when you listen to Alberta and Premier Smith, you realize that they envy what Quebec has done internationally. And I think that's important, that provinces do get more proactive and that they work very closely with the federal government. So my sense is that I see a threat sometimes as an opportunity. The threat is created, in my view, an opportunity for Canada to look in different directions. We are the only, we have a deal with every country of the G7. We have a trans-Pacific deal as well, but we've been complacent, as Julian said. We have not taken advantage of it. We sort of rested on our laurels with respect to the United States, and in some ways, Trump, irrespective of his personality and character and his penchant for polarization, he's probably made us do things that we probably would not have done and we needed to do.
What's interesting is some of the biggest blowback that has come to tariffs is Republican governors, senators in the North who feel much more hurt by us like shunning them commercially than the other way around, like everything with like imports, exports, travel, tours, everything. And they've been very, very outspoken, and that could really make a difference, I imagine, long term.
I think it's making a difference as we're speaking right now. I think the vote they took in the House against Canadian tariffs made a difference. I think there are splits happening within MAGA, the group that's behind Trump, that don't only deal with the economy, but they deal with other issues. So my sense is, and the disapproval, the rise in the disapproval rating of Trump isn't something because of Canada. It's something, a lot of it that is self-created, and we'll be smart to not exploit it openly, but we know that we have other means to offset what could be difficult in the next few weeks and months.
If I could ask, unless you wanted to do you want to weigh in on that?
No, I can.
Then I would ask, here we are, we're not sure if CUSMA is going to happen or not happen. Obviously, that's still very much up in the air. Generally, given what's going on, are you optimistic that we can actually get something done here, that things will get better or things will get worse?
Do you mean generally or with the United States?
Just with the U.S.?
I think that we can get some kind of agreement with the United States. I just think we have to be on guard. So I'm being realistic. I think that they're going to try to extract the maximum concessions from us possible. And I think the only thing we can do is know our bottom lines. If we know our bottom lines and when we're prepared to sign a deal versus when we're prepared to walk away and tell ourselves that no deal is better than a bad deal, I think that positions us well. But I think we can probably secure something. It is in the United States' interest. If President Trump and his associates are thinking about the American interest, it's not clear they are, but if they are, and there's midterms coming, they do have an incentive to not continue hurting the economies of many of their states. I think 35 of their states have Canada as their largest trading partner.
Exactly.
And so at some point they do have to recognize this. But it's not clear. Trump's not running again. At least not democratically.
No, I think Julian is absolutely correct. But I think the bottom line is that we have to know when to walk away from the bad deal. And my sense is that we have the kind of leadership right now in the country. I'm not just talking about the Canadian Prime Minister, but I'm talking about in general, that will walk away if we have to walk away. But we have to be smart about it. And Canada, has been. You talk about one of the richest countries in the world before free trade. But we're also probably one of the top diplomatic countries in the world in the post-World War. And it wasn't just political diplomacy; it was economic diplomacy.
One of the things that you were very well aware of are the intricacies or how the Democratic Party works. And one of the things people are talking about, well and good, that the Republicans lose control, but is there a leader ready to take them through the wilderness? Is there another Obama coming up? Who's going to lead the Democrats next election? Is there anybody out there that looks promising? Not Gavin Newsom and being the only...
My sense is that the Democratic bench is strong, except there's nobody right now emerging There's no speech made at a convention where a guy by the name of Barack Obama, all of a sudden people started to look at him, didn't know who he was. He makes a speech, and 4 years later he's the nominee and gets elected. I don't think we're living that now, but it's not abnormal that we're not sure where the Democrats are going to go right now, because the midterms is not about the Democrats.
Right.
It's about Trump more than anything, and the Republicans are on the defensive. So in my sense, we can have this discussion much more about a year from now, whereby candidates are going to start, we'll have set up committees, and we'll start recruiting, and we'll start fundraising. Yes, Gavin Newsom is an important name to keep in mind. Josh Shapiro is also an important name. He's the governor of Pennsylvania. Peter Buttigieg is all over the map in terms of media. He's there. And there are a lot of other people.
There's this Tallarico character, James Tallarico in Texas, that's stirring things up.
He's stirring things up, and I think what he could do is he could surprise by winning the nomination with the Democrats and ultimately winning office this way. But I don't think he's going to be the next candidate for the presidency. But I do think that it shows that if Texas can have this type of change, then there's change coming around, and people emerge along the way. I mean, I go back. I'm older than my new friend Julian next to me here, but if you would have asked me in the mid 1970s if Ronald Reagan would become president of the United States or Jimmy Carter would become president of the United States, I would have given you 3 other names that would have had it. So we're going to have some surprises, and my sense is that the Democrats have to have a message that is more centrist, that is much more economic, that is much more down to earth. You can't always be preaching to the opposition. You have to have something to inspire and attract people. And right now, that's not happening. But that's okay, because right now they're not at the front end of the equation. It's whether people want to keep Trump or support Trump. And if he loses one of the houses, then the Democrats are going to. You'll see people emerging even more.
All right, we will leave it at that. John Parisella, Julian Karaguesian, I want to thank you both for being here. Appreciate
Thank you for having me.
We're going to reconvene next time there's an American president.
That'd be great.
See what happens.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
you.
for watching this edition of The Corner Booth. We'll
you.
see you again soon.